At the pool, a man told her to pack up and leave, assuming she didn't belong there. What he didn't realize, she'd lived in that community for nearly a decade. Oh, and she also happened to be the chief of police. Patrice Hullman didn't need much. Just a folded lounge chair, a solid pair of sunglasses, and a day without calls from dispatch. That's all she wanted after 3 relentless weeks of back-to-back shifts and more internal meetings than anyone should ever endure. This Saturday, it finally felt like she could breathe. A little past noon, she stepped out her back door, slid into a pair of sandals, and tucked a water bottle under her arm. She lived in a small, gated neighborhood in Temecula, California, quiet, middle income, mostly families, retirees, and a few tech workers drawn to suburban life. 9 years she'd been here, bought the house outright, knew every board member of the HOA by name. So when she strolled down to the shared pool, she felt like she belonged, because she did. She wasn't in uniform. She was off duty, and it showed. Loose long-sleeve tee, black capri joggers, hair tossed up into a quick bun. No makeup. No badge. Just another tired-looking mom, exactly how she wanted it. As she stepped through the iron gate, she gave a casual wave to Luis, the lifeguard, a college kid who'd seen her plenty of times before. "Good afternoon, Miss Hullman," he greeted, nodding. She smiled, found a chair near the shallow end, and sat down with a quiet sigh. The pool wasn't crowded. A couple of older couples flipping through paperbacks. Kids splashing at the edge. A young mom in a sundress, negotiating with her toddler over floaties. Peaceful.
Warm. Still.
Patrice let her eyes drift closed. No thoughts about work. Not the officer with a late report. Not the new recruits waiting for evaluation. Not the endless city hall politics. Just the sun. The occasional burst of laughter. The rhythmic splash of water. Minutes passed. She wasn't asleep, just resting. Then footsteps.
Loud.
Confident. Purposeful. Slowly, she opened her eyes. A tall white man in khaki shorts and a tucked-in polo stood nearby. No towel. No pool bag. No sign of someone here to enjoy the afternoon. No, he looked like a man on a mission. "Excuse me," he said, voice dipped in polite sarcasm. "Do you live here?" She blinked, sitting up slightly.
"Yeah."
"I do." His arms folded. "Really?" A short chuckle, one that had nothing to do with humor. "Because I've never seen you here before. This pool's for residents only." Patrice studied him. No one else seemed to notice their exchange yet. A freshly printed HOA pamphlet peeked from his pocket. Not a bead of sweat on him. Maybe this was his first summer here. "I live 3 houses down," she said, calm. "Been here almost a decade." Another laugh.
Short. Disbelieving. Right.
"And you just wandered in?" "No," she answered evenly. "I used the gate. Like everyone else."
His jaw tightened.
"You know, we've had some issues with people sneaking in from outside. I think you'd understand why I have to say something." Patrice tilted her head slightly. "What's your name?" A pause. Then, Dennis. "Dennis Whitlow.
Just moved in last month."
"I take the rules pretty seriously." She nodded. "Well, Dennis, I live here. You're welcome to check the HOA directory. You'll find me listed, Patrice Hullman." But he didn't move. Instead, his gaze shifted over his shoulder, like he expected backup. None came. The young mom was still wrangling her toddler. Luis had earbuds in. The pool might have been half full, but right now, it felt like it was just the two of them. Dennis took a step closer. Not too close, just enough. "You don't have a key fob on you," he pointed out. "It's in my bag," she replied. No movement. No offer to prove it. His eyes narrowed. "I'm going to call the HOA board and report this." She shrugged. "You're welcome to." His mouth opened like he had more to say, but nothing came out. And Patrice? She already knew this wasn't about rules. This was about assumptions. And Dennis wasn't done making them. He didn't back away. Instead, he planted himself there the way a security guard with something to prove might. Patrice knew this stance. She'd seen it too many times, on sidewalks, at school meetings, even in courtrooms. It was the posture of someone who had already decided who you were and didn't expect to be wrong. I just think it's odd, he continued, pacing slightly, that I've been here a whole month and never seen you once. You'd think neighbors would have crossed paths by now. Patrice leaned back in her chair. Or maybe, she said, you've just been looking in the wrong direction. That didn't sit well with him. A quick scoff.
Right.
Look, you can make this easy, or we can call security and figure it out that way. She didn't move. Dennis, she said, voice even, I told you I live here.
His tone sharpened.
I don't need attitude. And I don't need to be interrogated at my own pool, she replied, calm. Eyes never leaving his face. A pause. The air around them still felt relaxed, but their conversation? It had weight now. A few people glanced over. Not staring, just flickers of attention.
And sometimes?
That's all it takes. Dennis gestured toward her bag. So, why not just show me your fob then? Because I don't owe you anything, she said simply. I'm not about to prove myself to a man who decided I don't belong here before I even said a word. That struck him. A muscle in his jaw twitched. But he stayed on script. You're making this harder than it needs to be. If you've got nothing to hide, then what? She cut in. You'll let me stay? He hesitated. Surprised she called it out so directly. Patrice wasn't angry, not yet. But after 25 years in law enforcement, training officers in de-escalation, she knew exactly what Dennis was doing. Control the narrative. Force compliance. Make her small so he could feel tall. I don't need your permission, she added. Just then, an older man in a baseball cap from a nearby lounge chair looked up from his paperback. You all right over there, Patrice? Dennis blinked. She nodded. I'm good, Carl. Thanks. And just like that, the shift. Small, but undeniable. Someone else recognized her. Maybe she wasn't the outsider he thought. Still, Dennis wasn't ready to let go. I just don't see why it's a big deal to confirm, he muttered, now quieter. This place has rules for a reason. Patrice sat up a little straighter. You saw a black woman sitting alone and assumed something was off. You didn't ask, you accused. You didn't check facts, you made assumptions. And now, you're doubling down because you're embarrassed. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. It's not about that. Then what is it about? She asked genuinely. Because you walked up here like a mall cop on a power trip. That one hit. His mouth twitched. Nearby, a teenager sat at the edge of the pool, phone in hand. Not recording yet, but watching. Patrice took another sip of water, letting the silence stretch. Then, as if on cue, a familiar voice cut through the tension. Everything all right here, Chief. Dennis turned, confused. Luis, the lifeguard, had stood up. His posture was casual, but his voice carried enough weight to turn a few more heads.
Chief.
The word landed like a stone in a still pond. Dennis blinked. Patrice exhaled slowly, then finally reached into her tote bag. Not for the fob, not for her phone, but for her badge. She held it up just enough for him to see. I didn't just move in last month, Dennis, she said, her voice steady. I've been here, keeping this community safe, for years. His mouth opened, then shut. His shoulders squared, but the bravado had cracked. He knew there was nothing left to say that wouldn't make him look worse. Luis smirked slightly. Carl, the older neighbor, let out a quiet chuckle and went back to his book. Dennis let out a tight breath. Well, he muttered, adjusting his polo. Guess I'll just... Yeah, Patrice cut in. Guess you will. And just like that, he turned and walked away.